Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 conductors whose remakes redeemed them. This is the complement to the video I did on 10 conductors whose remakes sucked. Because more often than not, let's face it, let's be honest, right? The remakes are not as good. It's just like the sequels are never as good as the originals, right? When you're talking about movies. Well, it's the same thing in music. Why that is, well, that's maybe a subject for another day. But there are occasions where the remakes improved on the originals. Conductors do mature. They do have second thoughts. It's not always just, a game of chance. And so here are 10 examples of that, beginning with Seiji Ozawa, who you may recall in our first video, and these are complementary. I deal with a lot of the same conductors, same works. It's interesting. Anyway, his Carmina Burana sucked the second time around. Well, his Mahler 2 was a big improvement the second time around. His Mahler Second Symphony. Now, his first one was not bad. His Boston recording is very well played, nicely recorded, extremely well sung. You've got Marilyn Horne, I think, doing Urlicht. It's really quite good, but it was light and swift and lacking grandeur and bigness and power at the climaxes. The piece has to be an event, and this was a subscription night concert, not an event. Well, his remake with the Saito Kinen Orchestra in Japan was an event, marvelously recorded, fabulously well played, absolutely excellent. First rate and delightful, and I was so happy to hear him do it that way, because he matured, he slowed down a little, he gave the music room to breathe, and it's just a terrific performance. It's one of the great Mahler 2s. Next, Eugen Jochum's Carmina Burana instead of Ozawa's Carmina Burana. Now, Jochum was a friend of Orff, and he did Carmina Burana twice. Once in mono, like in 1953, and back then the German orchestras sucked, frankly. Most of them. They were rebuilding after the war. They weren't in great shape. Their percussion sections were always terrible. And how do you do Carmina Burana without a great percussion section? Tam-tams that sound like pots hit with wooden spoons and bass tambourines. They were awful. But his remake with the orchestra of the Deutsche Oper Berlin, oh, wow, baby, authorized by Karl Orff on the album with Fischer Dieskau and Gundula Janowitz, I think, or I don't know, fabulous singers, whoever they were. And it's just amazing. Absolutely amazing. What an improvement, because the orchestra's improved. There's a real issue as to how much a conductor can actually do if the orchestra just doesn't have the instruments, doesn't have the sounds that the composer expected. Well, here they did, and it's a huge improvement. Next, Haitink, good old Haitink, who remade, usually worse and worse and worse and worse. No, his Beethoven Symphonies 4 and 8 with the London Symphony, part of his Beethoven cycle remake, was fabulous. An amazing recording. I was shocked, frankly. Obviously, he had taken in some of the period instrument stuff to get his rhythms going and his timbres lean and mean, and the balance is different from his two previous Beethoven cycles, which were, duller and dullest. One was with the London Phil, the other was with the Concertgebouw. The second one, the Concertgebouw one, very musical, but totally lacking in personality. Well, this one, he woke up. Just a world of difference. And it's really a fantastic recording of both symphonies, one of the best. So that was very, very salutary. And he was old and grumpy then, and so it's just great that he could have done it. I felt really good for him. Next, Blomstedt's Nielsen cycle, his Decca version with San Francisco versus his original one, which was made with, either the Danish National or the Royal Danish, something with the Danish, the plum Danish, the cheese Danish, the Danish. It was done with the Danish. And the problem with that was that in those days, the Danish were just not up to playing Nielsen. They just didn't play it very well. I mean, the orchestra was not first rank. And his interpretations were always hands-off, a little bit lacking in gumption. And the combination of so-so orchestra and, let the music speak for itself conducting did not let the music speak for itself. But his Decca remakes in San Francisco, world of difference. Absolutely first class. Except for the very end of the Fourth Symphony, where I always think he went too much for the autumnal diminuendo thing, which Nielsen didn't actually write. to the extent that he does it. But anyway, they're just a world better. I mean, totally better. It's no question about it. No one's ever really argued that. I mean, there will always be people who will, but you should ignore those people because they just don't know what they're talking about. So there we go. Then we've got, let's see, Giulini. Remember we talked about Giulini's Franc D minor. Ugh. His remake for DG, which was horrible, whereas his original EMI recording was lovely. Well, here we have an interesting case. It's the Schubert Ninth. Now, his DG recording, which was with Chicago, was just a total snooze fest. And particularly because it had way too many repeats and the tempi were sluggish, and it was everything about it was just boring. Incredibly boring. And however much love and affectionate phrasing and whatnot, it was boring. But he remade it with the Bavarian, Bavarian Radio, right? Orchestra, yeah, the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra. And wow, what a difference. It's even slower, if anything, but it doesn't have all those repeats. And the difference is the sound of the orchestra and the balance of texture that allows you to hear sort of through the various levels of sonority. And whereas the Chicago recording just sounded thick and heavy and rhythmically slack, this one is not heavy in that sense. It seems alive. The various parts have vitality, even though it's terribly slow. It's very interesting to compare the two. It really is, because it tells you that, you know, your impression of how vibrant a performance is not just a matter of tempo. It has to do with everything. It has to do with balance and rhythm and all of those characteristic qualities, which he realizes to much, much better effect in the Sony remake. So good for him. Next, Klemperer's Bruckner Fourth. Well, his first one, or one of his first ones, I think the first one was on Vox with the Vienna Symphony. I mean, come on, right? I mean, this was post-war awfulness at its ripest. You know, actually, until Klemperer started recording for EMI, he was a has-been. I mean, he was already pretty old, and these recordings, we never knew, because he was manic depressive, whether he would be on or off, depending on what he did with his meds, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that those early Vox recordings are almost uniformly awful. Usually very quick. He was not a slow-mo guy. That happened later as he got older. And really indifferently played and abominably recorded. And the remakes with Walter Legg, with the Philharmonia, I mean, wow, what a difference. His remake is one of the iconic Bruckner Fourths. So go figure. What are you doing, Mildred? Oh, she's under my desk running around. Okay. It's an amazing difference. Absolutely amazing. Then we've got Colin Davis's Sibelius Kullervo Symphony, RCA versus the LSO label. Now, you may recall in our last episode on this topic, Colin Davis humiliated himself comprehensively with his dreadful RCA Sibelius remakes after his superb Phillips/Decca Boston Symphony Sibelius cycle and other things. Well, his first crack at the Kullervo Symphony was in that RCA cycle. And like everything in that cycle, it was sluggish and badly recorded. It was slow and boring, and it was horrible, just horrible. Well, he redid Kullervo with the LSO on its own label, and what a difference. Oh my goodness. It's lively and exciting and really well played and spontaneous. It has all of the qualities that first recording of Kullervo lacked. So there you go. There is hope. There is always hope for redemption. And then after Colin Davis, let's see who we got here. Andre Previn. You mentioned this. I was doing this series and one of you wrote, what about, because I talked about Previn's Walton 1 remake with the Royal Phil that wasn't as good as his London Symphony original one on RCA. And one of you said, well, his Belshazzar's Feast with the Royal Phil was a big improvement over his EMI one. That's right. It was. It is. It was on MCA, coupled with, I think, the Henry V film music. I talked about it in random reviews from the Overflow Room, I believe. Really a wonderful performance that no one cared about or noticed or paid any attention to. But wow, what a difference. It's livelier. It's recorded much, much, much more powerfully. And I mean, it's one of the great Belshazzar's Feasts, and nobody knows about it. But it's better. Absolutely better. Karajan. Oh, yeah, we got to do Karajan. Karajan's Bartók, music for strings, percussion, and Celesta. Now, his first stereo one, because I think he did a mono one with the Philharmonia. We talked about that also in great string recordings, string orchestra recordings. It was awful. His first Berlin Philharmonic one, which is the one we're talking about, was coupled with Hindemith's Mathister Mahler Symphony. Dreadful. It was from the 50s. It was right when he took over, was going to take over Berlin after Furtwängler passed away. It was just the Hindemith he did because he wanted to do what Furtwängler did. You know, Furtwängler had the relationship with Hindemith and recorded Mathister Mahler and caused a whole scandal in Nazi Germany and all this stuff. And for Karajan to even touch that piece was kind of an insult, frankly, to Hindemith and to Furtwängler, and it's just a dreadful performance. But his Bartók was just as bad, with grainy sounding strings and none of the richness, the texture, the incisiveness. I mean, the timpani playing is wooden and ugly. It's just awful. And his remake was stunning. Absolutely stunning. And, you know, he knew what was wrong, evidently, and he was able to improve on it. And with Karajan, these are tough calls because he didn't really change very much from one performance to the next. Normally, his interpretations remained enormously consistent. But here's one where he really improved the game. There were a few recordings where he actually did much better the second time around. One of them was like the Symphony Fantastique. You could argue the Shostakovich 10th and some other things, but mostly he was pretty even-keeled. And last but not least, well, we've ended the last one with Bernstein's horrible remake of the New World Symphony, and now we're going to do his excellent remake of the Mahler Fifth. Now, his first one with the New York Phil was really grotty. It was indifferently recorded and it was indifferently played. The orchestra really sounded off. They get lost in the scherzo, the timpanist does anyway. And it's just a very, very, it seems like it's lacking conviction, which is really rare for Bernstein. But he remade the Fifth, and they recorded it, I believe, with the Vienna Philharmonic on tour in Frankfurt. So they got much better sound than they usually got in the Sophiensaal or wherever they recorded in Vienna. And it's a fabulous performance. It's got all the things right that went wrong the first time. Yes, the tempos are somewhat broader than they were originally, but they're not sluggish. The performance never goes to sleep. The playing is really good, and it's the toughest Mahler symphony to do. And he really made them play. He really forced them to play, I think. And it sounds glorious. It's one of his best Mahler recordings in his new cycle, which is great because he really deserved a chance to get it right. So there you have it, my friends. 10 recordings by 10 conductors where they redeem themselves the second time around. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.